Shalom, shalom. Bear with me. All right. Shalom, shalom.
Right. Shalom, shalom.
Right.
Shalom, shalom.
I am in. Sirach 5 and 15. Be not ignorant of anything in great matter or of small. Koholo Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Chakodash. Double honors and salutations to the elder apostles, the elder bishops of Great Millstone. Shalom unto you, beautiful men, with the water for your labor through the years. Shalom to the 144,000, the men, the governing body, preaching this word at this very hour. And shalom to the innumerable one-third, the apostle spirits that were ordained to believe on the names of Yahweh, while Yahweh shall in all truth and sincerity. I'm the brother Yasrael Allah from the GMAS Dallas camp, coming back at you with a late night lesson. Abaratazah, meaning Lord willing, in the ancient Paleo Hebrew is edifying unto those of you who are tuned in, those of you who believe on the names, fear and trembling, right, and believe the report of Yahweh Bahasham Yahushai. All right, and as always, I like to start off with 1 Thessalonians 5 and 21. Prove all things and hold fast to which is good. So, Babu Kashaf, you have your swords, pull them out of their sheaths and follow along. As you know, this is not Salakia. That is the correct way to teach and to learn, and you'll know that these are not my vain words or opinion, but the actual oracles of the Heavenly Father. All right. And the name of this lesson here, I was meditating on it earlier today when I was at work, is learn a useful skill set. We are in the time of preparation. Learn a useful skill set. We are in the time of preparation. And I brought out that Sirach 5 and 15, be not ignorant of anything in a great matter or small, because that is a very heavy, very, very heavy Bible verse. All right, now, in this lesson, I'm going to be dealing with the mindset of a wise man. All right, we know this precept can be attributed to a lot of things in life, but particularly in this lesson, I want to address the importance of having a skill set, right? The principle is that a man shouldn't willingly remain ignorant, especially in these times, or incapable or unprepared, all right? Whether the matter seems big or small, all right? That's attributed to being a man, ultimately, along with leadership qualities, discipline, diligence, and so forth, all right? Now, for brothers that are in this truth, we all have jobs in different varieties of fields to make a living, right? Some of us have office jobs, data entry, accounting, clerical, telecommunications, and so on. All right, and we're moving into perilous times, so it would be wise for brothers to seek out a skill set, all right, in your free time, whether it be after work or, before the gym or after the gym, or whatever the case may be. All right, picking up a newfound skill set brings a feeling of enrichment, man. All right, and it's very fulfilling. All right, so when you read Sirach 38 and 24, it says, the wisdom of a learned man cometh by the opportunity of leisure. As a matter of fact, let me grab that really quick. Just bear with me. I'll try and remember to pull up these precepts as I go, but that's why I mentioned to have your swords to follow along. Sometimes we get in the spirit and we just rock. All right. Where is it? 38 and... let me see here. Hold on here. 24. So, my computer, for some reason, seems to be acting up. It's running slow, but nonetheless, we'll get through it. All right. It says, wisdom of a learned man cometh by opportunity of leisure, right? So having a skill set is a form of wisdom, all right? It isn't merely knowing the scriptures or, processing, intellectual or pertaining to intellectual knowledge, should I say? All right, but there is also wisdom expressed through competence. All right, knowing how to actually do something. All right, these things are going to be needed when societal collapse takes place. All right, there's going to be job loss. All right, that's going to be at an all-time high. All right, so having a skill set, craft, or a useful ability, all right, being confident and knowing how to do something is going to make a huge difference in these times that we're coming into. All right, and there's a certain fulfillment, as I said, that comes with learning a new skill and realizing that you can now do something that you couldn't do it before. Okay, all right. Now, just when looking at me and my walk in this thing, as a testimony, all right, when I came into this thing, all right, in the very beginning, I was in, the music industry, but the Lord, increased and switched things up for His reason and His purpose. All right, soon after that, I became a butcher. All right, then a certified forklift operator, maintenance and repair. All right, now facility tech. All right, and aerospace industry. But nonetheless, all these things I had never thought that I would ever learn to do. All right, but I embrace them now because I know that they're going to be useful for me in the times that we're coming into. All right, in my experience down here with the brothers in Dallas, I've noticed how the Lord is moving with brothers. All right, some brothers who held office jobs of some sort are now obtaining certificates in HVAC, electrical, plumbing, IT, all right, construction, all right, and things of that nature. Not saying that getting those jobs in that field are a must, but look, simply knowing how to fish, all right, though it may seem small, can greatly benefit in the times that are needed. All right, knowing how to sow or knowing about herbs or how to plant and how to hunt may seem great. And all these things are great traits. All right, and it'll be useful to the body in the coming times. All right, Paul mentions the use and know-how of his hands, all right, as a benefit not only to himself but to others that he was with. As a matter of fact, let me grab that in Acts 20, and I'm grabbing the NLT in 34. I'll get straight to the point. It says, yeah, yet yourselves know that these hands have ministered unto many necessities and to them that were with me. All right, you see that? So our forefathers stood as great examples of men working skillfully with their hands. All right, you look at Paul, you look at Andrew, who were fishermen, also James and John. Right, when you read, what is that, Mark the first chapter, Yahushua himself found them mending nets, all right, repairing, doing work with their hands. You see, Paul was a tent maker along with Aquila and Priscilla. Yahushua himself was a carpenter. All right, so as the days we see are shortening, all right, and the prophecies are passing, all right, as we continue in this faith, in this walk of ours, learning and increasing through the Spirit, it's important to manage our time wisely, all right, and find balance, all right, because what we want to do ultimately is be outside of being in the Spirit, is being resourceful. Okay, now through the Spirit, we can see that the Lord is preparing us, all right, as we're getting ready to be as pilgrims on the earth. Sirach 38 talks about how a man could be devoted to the Lord while still knowing how to work with his hands. All right, as a matter of fact, I'm going to grab that Ecclesiastes 38:27. So every master that laboreth night and day, right, meaning because mastery requires consistent work, discipline, repetition, all right, not just, an occasional effort. It's something that you would spend a lot of time with. As we, strive for the masteries in this walk, all right, it would behoove brothers to strive for mastery or skill set, all right, in these times that we're in. Goes on to say, and they that cut and grave seals are diligent to make a great variety, right? Goes into what? Patience, attention to small detail, right? A craftsman develops his ability so he can produce different kinds of work ultimately, all right? But merely one simple task is not going to do, or should I say, I wouldn't say not going to do, but to know a little about a lot is wise. That's a saying that, that I'm sure brothers have heard in the world, to know a little bit about a lot is wise, right? It says, and give themselves to counterfeit imagery and watch to finish a work. Right now, so when you go into counterfeit here, it carries more of an older or ancient sense, all right, meaning more along the lines of copying or portraying, reproducing an image, not necessarily an idol worship, okay? More like if you have an idea or a blueprint drawn up of how to build something or create something, Okay, so it refers basically to the artsman, to the artistic craftsmanship. All right, being accurate and precise in building and creating or even repairing. Okay, so these things are going to be essential in the times we're coming into. 28 verse, it says, the smith also sitting by an anvil and considering the ironwork, the vapor of the fire uh, wasteth his face, and he fighteth with the heat of the furnace. Right. My grandfather used to say, anything that worth having is not easy to come by. All right. So a skill set is a worthwhile attribute that's going to be needed. Okay, in these times we're coming into, so it behoove once again, brothers, to attain some sort of skill set with your hands. And granted, there are a lot of brothers in the camp here. It's a beautiful thing that, as I mentioned, either work with their hands already, or certain brothers that had different office jobs or different things where now they're getting into other fields. All right. And it's a beautiful thing to see. So I see how the Lord is actually working. All right. Goes on to say, the noise of the hammer and the anvil is forever in his ears, and his eyes look still upon the pattern of the thing that he maketh. Right. So when you're working with your hands, all right, that's pretty much one of the purest acts of creation. All right. All right, the focus that you have, your focus, you're locked in, is a beautiful thing. Okay, goes on to say, he sitteth with his mind to finish his work, and washeth and watcheth to polish it perfectly. Right, because when you're in creativity or when you're in work mode and you're doing things with your hand, there's an unspeakable joy in accomplishing or finishing a creation. Right, or again, even repairing something. All right, that's an attribute of being a man overall. Okay, Sirach 39, 38, and 29. So that the potter sitting at his work and turning the wheel about with his feet, who's always carefully set at his work and maketh all his work by number. Right. So you develop good habits, all right, when creating, all right, like patience, right, order, integrity, right? All these things are good attributes that you develop, and those things will be helpful and useful, not only to yourself, but to the brothers, to the body, as we're coming into these times, right? 30th verse. He fashioned the clay with his arms and boweth down his strength before his feet. He applieth himself to lead it over, and he is diligent to make clear the furnace. Right, you see? But here's the point. All these trust to their hands, and everyone is wise in his work. Without these cannot a city be inhabited, and they shall not dwell where they will, nor go up and down. Right? So these kind of skill sets can go from building a kingdom and empires to determining whether or not you live or your loved ones live or die or survive. You see, that's the extreme, all right, of having a skill set in these times. And here in Babylon, we've been so conditioned, all right, to just, go to school and be dictated to and just kind of not think outside the box. Okay, I remember back, going to high school, we had certain classes in high school they don't have anymore. Home ec, electric, plumbing, all these things they had in high school. But then they don't really now in this latter in time, they don't push that individual mindset, like that entrepreneurial mindset, to go out here and learn and do things for yourself. All right, so as a man, especially men of the Lord that have come into this thing, all right, that's the mindset that we have, because that's the mindset of our forefathers. Okay, so we understand the importance of working with your hands, okay, and having some sort of skill set. All right, so when you go back to Sirach 5 and 15, be not ignorant of anything small or great, right? Because a man's skill set gives him, as I said, competence. All right, you don't want to just be, a nigga going through life unable to handle basic responsibilities as a man, all right, simply because you never bothered to learn or take the time, okay? You don't want to have that mindset, all right? That mindset is going to ultimately turn around and bite you in your ass in the times that we're coming into, all right? So the beautiful thing, as I said about the men of the Lord, is we love to learn, okay? Even practical skills, such as, fixing and maintaining things, whether you're using tools, equipment, understanding electrical. Look, you can even know the basis of things, right? The difference between the ground wire, the hot wire, and the neutral wire, right? You don't have to be a master at all these things, but having a skill set is going to be of the utmost importance in the time. Yeah, now we know that, ultimately having the spirit of Yahweh Shem Yahushua is the ultimate goal, because you can be a master in many and and still be destroyed. And there are many that will be, because why? Ultimately, they don't have the key ingredient, the principal thing, which is Yahweh Yahweh Shah. Right, but nonetheless, for the things that we can do in this grace period that we do have, and the downtime that we do have, where the Lord has allowed us to be able to read and study and go to work and get up to day to day and function, take that time, use those time, to be able to develop useful skill sets, man. All right, don't be lazy in this thing. These things are only going to help you, and Scripture talk about how a man foreseeth evil and hideth himself. All right, we hide ourselves within the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of Yahweh Shem Yahushua. All right, and as I said, part of wisdom is physical. All right, being able or being capable of being able to do things physically. Okay, goes on to say managing money, communication and negotiating. There's a couple of things that I just looked up, pertaining to that precept. All right, because I believe in the times that we're coming into, bartering will be useful. It will be a thing that will be brought back. There will be bartering out here. All right, knowing how to trade. All right, being able to communicate. Those things are going to be of the utmost importance. Now, I'm not saying that you got to know everything, of course, right? But don't choose ignorance. All right, when something matters, learn it, understand it, and become capable. Right, basically know how to be resourceful and to be able to solve problems. Okay, because we're coming into big problems. All right, we're coming into hell, man. All right, so only thing you're really going to be left with is what you know how to do. Ultimately, is Yahweh Yahweh Shah and what you know how to do. Okay, and this also goes for you women out here too. All right, soon as the men of the Lord mention Isaiah 4:1, a lot of women get offended. All right, the only thing they think about when it pertains to that with us is getting a box or having multiple women. No, okay, a lot of you women are going to be a liability in that day. We know that. That's why 1 Timothy, what is that, 2:15 says, she shall be saved through childbearing. All right, there ain't going to be no goddamn single ladies on the chariot. Y'all women got to understand that. All right, you're going to be required to have a skill set as well. All right, so all of you that just have box to offer in that day, you're going to be of no value for the man of the Lord. When you read Isaiah 3:16, Isaiah 32:9, right, the Lord is getting ready to take away everything from you and strip you and make you bare. And he mean it. Read those. I'm not going to pull them. Okay, for those using this truth, you've heard us say and do many lessons on Isaiah 3:16, Isaiah 32:9. Okay, now I did a lesson, a couple of weeks ago back, where it was basically an interview with Elon Musk. And he was recently quoted in a video saying that any jobs that are physical, when he talks about welding, house building, construction, plumbing, electrical, work, farming, basically doing anything with your hand, physical manual labor will exist for a much longer time. All right, but anything that's digital, all right, sitting at a computer pushing buttons, doing something clerical, secretary, administrative, AI is going to take those things over like lightning speed. Right, when you look at the percentage, 85 to 95% of those jobs are filled by women. Now, yeah, there are men out there as well, okay, that sit in those jobs, but nonetheless, the bulk of that number are women. All right, so when I read Isaiah, all right, through the Spirit, Isaiah 4:1, all right, that speaks to, or should I say, more or less, when I read Isaiah 30, 3:16, and Isaiah 32:9, to me, that speaks to the women of the 2/3. Okay. All right, wherein Isaiah 4:1 speaks to the mindset of the elect lady. All right, because when you read that with understanding, you have to ask yourself, what did these women see in that day, that caused them to straighten up? All right, because the scripture talks about in the day of that, they should be willing in the day of that power. Yeah, you're going to be willing to do whatever Yahweh Shem Yahushua says through the men of through his prophets in the day, all right, when all hell is broken loose out here. Okay, as a matter of fact, I'm going to grab that here really quick. This is, where am I? Isaiah. This is this precept is speaking louder and louder, as the days go forward. Isaiah 4:1. In that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by thy name to take away our approach. Right. So the two things these women specifically say is that they will provide for themselves. Okay, in the ancient household setting, that naturally connects to a woman's practical abilities as a woman. growing, gathering food, right? Preparing ingredients, cooking, baking, preserving, feeding the house, right? The average modern woman doesn't know anything about herbs today, right? Which are the ones that will heal opposed to those that are poisonous, right? You don't know how to cook, let alone have a cookbook. Okay, how many women do you know that know how to cook from scratch? Okay, because in that day, there are not going to be any grocery stores where you're going to be able to run into and buy instant or frozen meals, bread, cheese, beans. All right, so Isaiah 4 and 1 is letting you women know that you're going to have to be an industrious woman with your hands. All right, and that Isaiah 4 and 1 speaks to a very small number of women. Okay, because in the days that are coming into, knowing the basics is going to be enough. Like I said, you're not going to have to be an expert at that things, but knowing the principal things. Matter of fact, let me grab that. It's a spirit. Just hit me. Oh, yes, is 39, and we'll go to there it is. All right, let's grab this. All right. Sirach 39:26. The principal thing for the whole use of man's life are water, fire, iron, and salt, flour of the wheat, honey, milk, blood of the grape, oil, and clothing. Right. So these elements represent the core necessities required for survival, warmth, preparation of food, daily living in the ancient world. Right. And this is what's going to be like out here. Right. It's going to seem like the days of antiquity when all hell breaks loose out here, when everything is shut down and all you have to rely on, all right, solely the men of the Lord and Yahweh Shah, but and what you're able to do. And I'm speaking to women, okay, your capabilities, because being pretty is going to be a curse unto you in that day. Okay, they're not gonna be no women running around, worry about getting their eyelashes done, their fingernails done. When I say the Lord stripping you bare, okay, I mean you're gonna be without all the teats and dainties. All right, these things that cover shit up and make you look pretty. You're gonna be stripped down to your raw, and you're gonna have to embrace that. Even more so, you're gonna have to look in the mirror and say, okay, well, what do I have to offer? Because most women are born with their value. All right, so we're coming into a time where, as men have to, in this world, or this society, I should say, men have to create their value, and women are born with it. We're coming into a time where it's going to be the other way around. You see, Isaiah 4 and 1 speaks about a woman having to create her value. Why? Because the men of the Lord are going to already have the value, being that newborn creature through the Spirit. You see how that works? All right, so again, as I said, these elements represent the core necessities required for survival. All right, and it's going to be all hell out here. So nowhere in that verse did it mention a woman as a necessity, you see? Because as you can see when you read that verse, the provisions will already be and are already provided of the Lord. So for you women that don't want to get right, the Lord will provide ones that will. It's just as simple as that. Okay? So I didn't want to make this lesson too long. I just wanted to address, the importance of learning a useful skill set in these times for both men and women. All right? As they're going to be needed. All right? 99% of the people here in Babylon do not know how to survive off the grid. But that was done by design. You see? So that's why Yahweh Shai says, to separate. Come out of her, my people. Meaning mentally first, we got to separate. We got to go back to the days of ancient and start learning how to care for ourselves, knowing about herbs, knowing about healing yourself. Yeah, I'm not saying going to a doctor is a wicked thing. No, but we should all have knowledge of herbs and healing and medicines. There should be no excuse, because in the ancient days there were no doctors and walking around and robes and had booties. No, that was natural. That was an ongoing thing within our culture, and we have to return back to that. All right. So I don't want to make this lesson too long. I brought this out was edifying for those of you who are meant to receive it. I want to give all honors and praises to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Kakodash. Double honors once again to the elders, the apostles, the elder bishops of Great Millstone, and Shalom.